The machine gun had transformed the ground war. Was there a way to somehow get it airborne?
They had to devise some means of firing a gun through the rotating propeller, fixed to the airplane so it could be steered by steering the airplane. And of course the big problem was propeller avoidance.
The breakthrough came with a dashing young French aviator named Roland Garros, already famous for winning a string of air races in the pioneer days before the war. Now he had become a test pilot for Raymond Saulnier, a leading aircraft designer. Saulnier was experimenting with various devices that would allow a gun to fire safely through the path of a rotating propeller. One simple, though crude solution was to fix metal deflector wedges to the propeller blades of his airplane.
The idea being that when the machine gun fired, if a bullet hit the steel wedge, it would be deflected away from the wooden propeller. Sometimes it split the bullet, sometimes it came back at you, so this was gutsy stuff.
In February 1915, Garros intercepted a German reconnaissance aircraft. Within seconds, he sent it burning to the ground. The kill was followed by at least 2 more victories.
Garros absolutely confounded the Germans that this airplane coming towards them with the rotating propeller, they thought they were perfectly safe, and suddenly it started spouting bullets. So there was confusion in the ranks.
But his success was brief. Soon after, his engine failed behind enemy lines and Garros was captured. Meanwhile, a brilliant young Dutch designer working for the Germans, Anthony Fokker, came up with an improved solution to the firing problem. Capturing Garros aroused German interest in Fokker's work. Fokker thought the steel wedges were too crude and risky. A better idea was a mechanism that linked the spinning of the propeller to the firing of the gun. In a few weeks, Fokker perfected his so-called interrupter gear, an engine-driven system of cams and pushrods which operated the trigger of a Spandau machine gun. The mechanism allowed the gun to fire only when the bullet would miss the propeller blades. Fokker had delivered to the Germans the holy grail of the air war, a synchronized forward-firing machine gun.
You could put the line of the gun close to the line of the airplane directly in the pilot's eye view. So in the act of pointing his airplane at the target, he was effectively looking straight down the line of his gun.
By the autumn of 1915, the German Air Service had the upper hand. With their synchronized front-firing gun, the Fokker monoplanes, or Eindeckers, were arriving at the front with their ambitious young pilots. Among them were Max Immelmann and Oswald Bölke.
Bölke and Immelmann did begin to learn the language of aerial warfare. The aircraft wasn't that good, but it was reasonably maneuverable, reasonably fast, and best of all, it was great at diving. And that was what they actually used to devise some of the early fighter tactics.
The young German aces were admired and envied by Manfred von Richthofen, who was still stuck as a gunner in twin-engined bombers. He wanted to become an aerial fighter, like Oswald Bölke. Then, a chance encounter with his idol changed Manfred's life.
Among us, Bölke was the only one who had shot down an enemy airman. I asked, "Tell me honestly, how do you really do it?" To which he laughed and replied, "Good heavens, it is indeed quite simple. I fly in as close as I can, take good aim, shoot, and then he falls down."
Von Richthofen saw his destiny.
Bölke told him, if you want to have my experience, you must fly and you must become a pilot. And then he decided to go through the training and become a pilot.
While von Richthofen learned to fly, Bölke and Immelmann were preying on Allied reconnaissance planes and inventing the first fighter tactics.
Try to place yourself between the sun and the enemy. Attack when the enemy least expects it. Never turn your back and try to run. Foolish acts of bravery only bring death.
Bölke was really the father of aerial tactics. The early years of the air war were the era of the lone hunters. You had aces in particular who would go up, hide in clouds, look for a lone victim, pounce, try and take them by surprise, and shoot them down.
Slow two-seater spotter planes like the British BE-2C were particularly vulnerable.
Beware of the Hun in the sun. The British really had a problem on their hands. They were being shot down to such an extent, actually, that the pilots were calling themselves Fokker fodder. It was having an effect on morale, and we really needed to come up with some idea of how to tackle this.
To counter the threat, Brigadier General Hugh Trenchard responded with a new tactic. He ordered that all Allied reconnaissance planes had to be supported by at least 3 other armed aircraft.
People realised that they had to work together in the air. They couldn't just fly willy-nilly about as they wished. This was the whole idea of a formation. You may have been weak on your own, but in numbers you were strong.
Greater safety in numbers gave the Allies a better chance, but more aircraft in the skies meant an escalation of aerial combat or dogfighting.
There's one rule really, which is to kill the other guy before he can kill you. And if you can see him before he can see you, then that's 90% of the battle over.
As the Great War entered the spring of its 3rd year, both sides launched major offensives to break the stalemate between the trenches. First came the German push of Verdun, then the Allied counteroffensive of the Somme. Both failed. Epic, unrelenting slaughter would haunt a generation. This was war unlike anything seen before. Eyes in the sky now counted more than ever to the armies on the ground. New reconnaissance aircraft could transmit Morse code by wireless to the ground, delivering real-time intelligence that could help turn a battle.
The reconnaissance aircraft were the only ones that carried wireless during the First World War, and they were willing to pay the very significant weight penalty involved for these fragile aircraft because of the tremendous military advantage it gave to be able to talk in real time to the artillery battery to coordinate their fire, rather than having to spot the target, fly back to the artillery battery, land, and tell them where the target was, by which time, of course, it could well be too late.
Into this arena stepped Manfred von Richthofen. Now qualified as a pilot, he cut his teeth flying support sorties, first in a 2-seater, then an Eindecker fighter. But as the carnage of Verdun and the Somme dragged on below, Allied pilots began flying new speedy biplane fighters armed with synchronized machine guns. The seesaw of technological advantage now swung back to the Allies. The Germans, on the defensive, needed a new plan. All eyes looked to their top ace, Oswald Bölke.
People like Bölke had the idea of forming dedicated fighter groups, the so-called Jasters, with the best pilots and the best machines, which would go off and hunt the Allied aircraft and could be concentrated on particular sectors of the front, so that even if the Germans were outnumbered overall, at the key point in the key times, they might have at least numerical parity, if not sometimes superiority.
Bölke hand-picked his flyers. One was the young man he'd inspired to become a fighter pilot, Manfred von Richthofen. Bölke drilled his new protégés with his tactical principles. His Jasta II squadron quickly notched up victory after victory.
Bölker was looking for aggressive, capable pilots with the killer instinct that really characterizes all successful fighter pilots. They needed to have the situational awareness to know what was going on around them in a dogfight. They needed to have good marksmanship. All those things I think he saw, particularly the marksmanship and the ruthlessness in von Richthofen.
Toward the end of 1916, the new Jastas were gaining the initiative. With the arrival of the fast Albatros fighters in September, German air supremacy was regained. Bölker doubled his score to 40 victories, but at the height of success, he was killed in a mid-air collision with one of his own men. A month later, Bölker's successor was shot down by a British patrol. Its leader, the skillful ace Lano Hawker, would soon be drawn into a fateful aerial duel. His adversary was Manfred von Richthofen. In just 2 months, Manfred had notched up his first 10 kills. Now the rising star took off in his Albatros and ambushed Hawker's DH-2 squadron. The wheel of fortune was about to turn again.
I think you can see this combat as being the end of an era in a sense. It's marking the end of the aerial superiority that the British had managed to achieve over the battlefields of the Somme. The DH-2 is incredibly manoeuvrable, and Hawker obviously very talented. Richthofen had the advantage of speed and armament, so what then happened was a deadly game of tail chasing.
Both of us flying like madmen in a circle, first left, then right. I was acutely aware that I was not dealing with a beginner. Finally, he tried to escape by flying in a zigzag course. That gave me my chance. My opponent fell, shot through the head, a mere 150 feet behind our line. Another few minutes, and he might have escaped.
Here, Manfred really found somebody who was matching him, and he was the lucky one because in the end he could bring him down, but he really respected his competence and talent.
Hawker, the daring British ace, was buried beside the wreckage of his airplane. He was von Richthofen's 11th kill.
He shot to kill whenever possible because that was the best way of eliminating an enemy. If you shoot down the plane, you still have to contend with the pilot, but if you got the man, then you got both.
On January 10th, 1917, Manfred von Richthofen was appointed leader of his own squadron, Jasta 11. Fast gaining a fearsome reputation, the new commander painted his Albatros bright red. The legend of the Red Baron was born.